The city moved the way it always did at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, indifferent, relentless, lit by the amber blur of street lamps and the white sweep of headlights. Ethan Calloway had learned to read the city the way other men read spreadsheets. He knew which intersections backed up past midnight, which on-ramps the city maintenance crews always forgot, which stretch of Meridian Boulevard ran smooth and fast when everything else choked. What he had not learned, what no amount of driving could have prepared him for, was the woman in the back seat right now. She had been in the car for 11 minutes. She had not said a single word, and the silence coming off her was not the comfortable kind, not the tired executive heading home kind he'd gotten used to with this agency. It was the kind of silence that preceded something breaking. He watched her in the rear-view mirror without appearing to. She was looking out the window. Her right hand was pressed flat against her thigh, fingers spread, like she was trying to hold something down. Her left hand held her phone, screen dark, and she was not unlocking it. Vivian Hartwell. He'd done the pickup from the Alderton Grand, a private function, black tie. The kind of event he'd been ferrying people to and from for 8 months now. The agency briefing said, CEO, Hartwell Group, direct, minimal conversation preferred. Tip well, if on time. He'd been on time. She had come out of the hotel side entrance 12 minutes early, which meant something had gone wrong inside. She had given him an address, not the Hartwell Group Tower, not a hotel, a residential street in Lakeview. Then nothing. The phone in her lap lit up. She watched the screen glow without touching it. It went dark again. He said nothing. The light at Meridian and 4th went green, and he moved through it. Then, I need you to take me home. He glanced in the mirror. That is the address you gave me. I know what address I gave you. A pause. Something shifted in her voice, fractional, almost imperceptible. I just needed to hear it out loud. He didn't answer. He drove, 2 blocks from the turn onto her street. She spoke again. If you tell anyone what you see tonight, she said, I'll have you removed from the agency's roster. He kept his eyes on the road. I'm a driver. Miss Hartwell. I drive people places. Good. He pulled onto her street. The houses here were set back from the curb, large and quiet, the kind of neighborhood where the landscaping alone cost more than his monthly rent. He parked at the address she'd given him and put the car in park. She didn't move. He waited. I can't go in yet, she said. He turned off the engine. Ethan Calloway was 34 years old. He drove for Meridian Car Service 3 nights a week and did electrical repair work the other 4. And on the days the math was close, which was most of them, he reminded himself that close was better than not close. He had developed a reliable instinct for the exact threshold at which close became something else, and he kept himself a deliberate distance from that line. Not generous, deliberate. His daughter Nora was 7. She had her mother's dark eyes and his habit of going quiet when she was thinking hard about something. She was currently thinking hard about whether dinosaurs had felt lonely, which she'd announced at breakfast 3 days ago and had not yet resolved to her satisfaction. He had learned not to offer her premature conclusions. She needed to arrive at them herself, in her own sequence, or they didn't hold. The apartment on Clement Street was small and clean, and he had made it theirs drawings pinned to the kitchen cabinet with the magnets she'd chosen at the Science Museum, a reading lamp she'd picked out herself because it had a swan on the base, her shelf of dinosaur books arranged by size because that was how she'd decided it worked. He had not told her that the arrangement made no organizational sense. Some systems only need to make sense to the person who built them. He believed this about more things than just bookshelves. He had been a structural engineer for 6 years before Nora was born. He had worked on 3 bridge projects and 1 building that still stood in the downtown skyline, though nobody who drove past it would know his name. When Nora's mother left quickly, and without much warning, when Nora was 14 months old, he had recalculated everything. Not with grief, exactly. He had moved through the grief in the 6 months before she left, because he'd felt it coming, the way you can feel certain structural problems before they're visible. A shift in load distribution that isn't safe, but isn't yet dramatic. What remained after was arithmetic. The engineering salary was good, but the hours were not compatible with a child who needed picking up and dropping off and sitting with at night when the dark felt too large. He had taken work he could schedule around her. He did not talk about this with anyone. It was not a sacrifice he needed acknowledged. Vivian Hartwell was 36. She ran a company her grandfather had built, and her father had nearly destroyed through a combination of optimism and poor judgment that she had spent 8 years quietly reversing. The Hartwell Group now had 4 operating divisions, 2 pending acquisitions, and a reputation for precision that she had personally enforced 1 quarterly review at a time. People who worked under her described her as difficult. People who worked for her competitors described her as formidable. Both groups were correct, and the distinction was only about proximity. She had not taken a day off in 11 months. She had not been to a doctor in 14. She had told herself both of these things were temporary. Temporary was a word she deployed strategically to describe conditions she intended to address after the current problem was resolved. There was always a current problem. She had not yet noticed this was not a temporary condition but a permanent architecture. She had a brownstone in Lakeview that she had decorated to look like someone lived in it. She'd hired a designer, given the designer a budget, and approved the result in a single walkthrough. The result was correct, tasteful and quiet, and arranged around her approximate lifestyle. She ate dinner, standing at her kitchen counter, 3 nights out of 5. She had one friend, Margot, her CFO, who called on Sunday mornings, and Vivienne answered maybe half the time. On the Sundays she didn't answer. She told herself she'd been in the middle of something. This was true, but not the reason. She was not unhappy. She had simply stopped keeping track of what she felt. The way you stop checking the weather when you've already decided you're going out regardless. What she had not accounted for was that the weather keeps happening whether you check it or not. She did not know that the thing she'd stopped checking was beginning to accumulate. The Alderton Grand event was a private dinner for 46 people. Investors, board members, 2 men who had flown in from out of state specifically for this evening, and whose presence, Vivienne had been told, was a positive sign. She had known within 20 minutes that it was not. The 2 men, Wallace Drent and his attorney, a quiet individual named Ferris, had positioned themselves beside Raymond Kessler, her largest single shareholder, before the appetizers arrived. They had spent the cocktail hour in a triangle of conversation she could see from across the room. None of them had approached her. They had made eye contact once, Drent, directly, without expression, and then returned to Kessler. People who want to do business with you, approach you. People who have already done it, do not need to. By the time the entrees were cleared, she understood the shape of it. Drent was making a move on her board. Not hostile, not yet. The kind of move that gets called a strategic partnership discussion until it doesn't need to be polite anymore. He needed 3 board votes. He might already have Kessler. He would need 2 more. She had excused herself at 9:40. Not visibly. She did not leave visibly. She said 3 separate goodbyes to 3 separate conversations, each one calibrated to not signal departure. And she was on the sidewalk at 9:43, with her phone already open to the car service app. The night air was cold and she stood in it for a moment without putting on her coat. She needed the cold. It was clarifying. She had booked the first available driver. His profile said Ethan C., 4.9 rating, 8 months with the agency. She had not read past that. She had gotten in the car. She gave him her home address without looking at him and got in the back. She needed to think. She needed a space where no one was watching her think. Which meant somewhere that wasn't the back of a car being driven by a stranger, but that was what she had. She thought. Drent had been positioning for 2 months. She had seen it, logged it, moved it to the back of her mental queue because she had the Caldwell acquisition to close, and she could not hold every threat simultaneously. That had been a miscalculation. Her phone lit up. Raymond Kessler. She stared at his name. He never called this late, which meant he was either warning her, which would be decent of him and somewhat out of character, or he was reporting back to Drent that she'd left early and was assessing damage. She let it go to voicemail. Her hands were not entirely steady. This was new. In 8 years of running this company through regulatory reviews, a lawsuit, a fire at the Harrison facility, and one CFO who had to be removed with significant delicacy. Her hands had never been unsteady. She noted it the way she noted everything without judgment, as data. The data was, she was more frightened than she had allowed herself to realize. "I need you to take me home," she said. He pointed out, without inflection, that was already the plan. She registered this as neither unkind nor obtuse, just literal. She appreciated literal. She told him she'd have him removed from the roster if he spoke about tonight. She had said this automatically, from a long habit of controlling what left her vicinity. She recognized, as the words settled, that it was an unnecessary thing to say to a man who had given her no reason to distrust him. She did not retract it. He said he was a driver, and he drove people places. Something about the simplicity of that landed. When he parked and she couldn't move, he turned off the engine. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not suggest she take her time or offer anything verbal at all. He simply turned off the engine, which meant, "I'm not going anywhere." She had not expected that. They sat in the parked car for 9 minutes. He could feel the specific quality of her stillness, not calm, but controlled, like someone holding a door shut against pressure from the other side. He had seen it before, though not often in the back of his car. He'd seen it in his own mirror when Nora was an infant, and he hadn't slept in 4 days and there was simply too much to hold. You reach a point where your body runs out of the chemicals that make anxiety feel urgent, and what's left is a kind of suspended dread, very quiet, very heavy. He reached into the center console and found the water bottle he kept there for long nights and set it on the seat beside him where she could see it if she looked forward. He did not hand it to her. She would take it or she wouldn't. 30 seconds later, she reached forward and took it. She drank. He watched the street. The brownstone across from them had a lamp on in an upstairs window. 2 doors down, someone had left a bicycle on the porch. A cat sat on a front stoop, 3 houses down, watching nothing in particular with the focused indifference of a creature that has decided where it belongs. The neighborhood was the kind of quiet that accumulated, not silent, but deeply settled. These were houses that had been lived in long enough to absorb the habits of their occupants. Hers was the exception. Even from the outside, in the dark, it had the quality of a house that was waiting to be lived in. He had ferried a lot of people home over 8 months. Most of them went from the car door to the front door in one continuous motion, the choreography of routine. She had stopped. The stopping meant the house was not the destination, it was just the place. She had nowhere else to go. "I need to go in," she said finally. "Okay." She didn't move for another full minute. He did not fill the minute with anything. Some people, he had found, needed silence the way they needed air in quantity, and without comment. Then she opened the door. He got out without being asked, and came around not to help her out. She was already standing, but because parking was tight and the angle of the door was awkward and he was there, she didn't acknowledge it, and he didn't expect her to. The front steps were 4 wide stone risers. She took them without holding the railing until the 3rd one, and on the 4th, her heel caught the edge of the tread. It was not a dramatic fall. She caught the railing in time, but the movement was graceless. And in a woman whose every movement in the car had been precise and deliberate, it registered as more than clumsiness. She was running out of something. He came up the steps. "Do you have your key?" She looked at her bag as though she was surprised to find herself holding it. She had been holding it since the hotel. She opened it and found the key and held it toward the lock, and her hand was shaking enough that she missed the keyhole on the first attempt. On the second attempt, she applied her other hand to steady herself and missed again. He waited. She exhaled slowly through her nose, the controlled exhalation of someone who has decided to accept help from their own hands. She tried again. The key went in. She pushed the door open and stepped inside into the dark. And then her legs simply did not want to continue supporting her. He caught her before she reached the floor. She was not unconscious. She was somewhere adjacent to it. Present, but not assembled. Like a sentence with the words, out of order. He got an arm under her and walked her to the nearest piece of furniture, which turned out to be a cream-colored settee in the entryway that looked like it had never been sat on. He set her down. She leaned back against the cushions and closed her eyes. He looked around the house. Entry hall, wide staircase, open doorway to what appeared to be a kitchen. Everything was well chosen and slightly unlived in, like a magazine spread that someone had moved into without fully committing to. He found the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and came back. She took it without opening her eyes. Drank half. "Thank you," she said. He sat down on the bottom stair, which was far enough away to not be hovering. After a moment she opened her eyes. She looked at him with an expression that was calculating and exhausted in equal measure, assessing whether this was a situation she could control, arriving at the answer that it was not, and then arriving at the further answer that this was fine. "I'm not drunk," she said. I know. When did you know? You ordered water at the hotel bar. I was parked out front. I watched you through the window. She absorbed this. You pay attention. It's my job. Another silence. Not the earlier kind. Something had released fractionally. Around the edges. Someone is attempting to take my company, she said. He didn't respond. She wasn't asking for a response. Not violently, not illegally, necessarily, just surgically. A board maneuver that's been in preparation for 2 months, and that I should have neutralized already. She paused. I didn't, because I was busy closing a different deal. And now the window is significantly narrower. How narrow? She looked at him. The question had come back with more precision than she'd expected. The next board meeting is 10 days from now. I need 3 votes locked before then. I have 1 certain, 1 probable, and 1 I don't know. Then you have 10 days. I have 10 days, she agreed, as if the repetition helped. She leaned her head back. I haven't told anyone that. I haven't said it out loud. You don't have people you tell things to? I have people I manage. A beat. It's not the same thing. He didn't argue with that. She slept for 40 minutes on the settee, which she did not intend to do. When she woke, the entryway lamp was on a low, amber light she hadn't turned on, which meant he had, and there was a folded throw blanket she didn't remember being covered with. He was in the kitchen. She could hear the quiet sounds of someone who knew how to move through a space without disturbing it. She sat up slowly. Her neck ached. Her shoes were off. She didn't remember removing them. You're still here, she said. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. I thought you might need someone to lock the door when you went upstairs. It was such a practical answer. She thought about it. My father called me this afternoon, she said. She had not planned to say this. Before the dinner, he called to tell me that Wallace Drent is a family friend, that the board conversation might be good for the company, that I might consider it. He leaned against the doorframe, said nothing. My father has not been involved in this company for 6 years, she continued. I removed him from the board after the 3rd consecutive quarter of decisions I had to reverse. He was not angry about it. He is constitutionally incapable of anger. He is, however, perfectly capable of quietly handing information about our internal processes to a competitor because he finds the man charming and likes the attention. Does he know that's what he's doing? She considered this more carefully than he'd expected her to. Probably not. He thinks he's being helpful. He thinks I've always been too rigid. She paused. He's not wrong that I'm rigid. He's wrong about whether that's a problem. Ethan said, the company's still standing. The company, she said, is doing better than it has in 22 years. Yes. Silence. Outside, a car passed. Its headlights swept across the front window and moved on. I don't know who Drent spoke to internally, she said. I need to know that before the board meeting. If he's had access to our financials beyond what's public, there's a compliance issue on top of everything else. Who has access to your internal financials? She tilted her head. Board members. My CFO. 1 analyst in the finance department. A pause. My father, technically, because I never fully revoked his access credentials after the restructure. That was an oversight. Then that's probably where it went. She looked at him. You're not just a driver. I'm a driver right now. That's not an answer. No, he said. It isn't. He pushed off the doorframe. You should sleep properly. The settee isn't doing your neck any favors. She wanted to push the point. She let it go, which was unusual for her. The door locks automatically, she said. If you leave, just pull it behind you. He nodded. She went upstairs. He locked the door. He sat in his car for 3 minutes before starting the engine. The brownstone was dark now, except for one window, 2nd floor, left side. It went dark as he watched. He had a daughter at home with Mrs. Okonkwo from 4B, who charged $12 an hour, and never complained when Ethan ran late, and always had the good sense to leave him a short note about how the evening had gone. Nora ate well. Nora didn't. Nora had a nightmare. Nora laughed at something on the nature documentary for 20 minutes and wouldn't explain why. He had a folder of these notes in his kitchen drawer. He didn't know exactly why he'd kept them. He had an electrical job at 7:30 in the morning, a rewire at a dental office on Forsyth that he'd been contracted for 3 weeks ago. He had a life that operated on margins thin enough to require daily attention. Not painful margins, just ones that didn't leave room for the kind of carelessness that compounds. He was not a complicated man. He had decided this about himself some years ago, not as a limitation but as a clarity. He did not want things he couldn't hold. He did not perform emotions he didn't feel. He did not, as a rule, sit outside strangers' houses at midnight thinking about them. He started the engine and then sat without driving. What he knew, in the quiet, practical accounting he made of most things. She was intelligent. She was isolated by choice. And the choice was beginning to cost her more than she'd budgeted for. He had watched the same math play out in himself, once, when Nora was 2 and he'd decided he didn't need anyone's help, and that asking for it would be an acknowledgement that he was failing, which he wasn't. He was managing. He was always managing. He had been wrong about not needing help. He had needed it. Accepting it had not made him less capable. It had made him less brittle. There was a distinction, and the distinction had taken him the better part of a year to fully understand. He drove home. Mrs. Okonkwo's note said, "Nora Good watched Dinosaur Show. Asked me if I thought ancient creatures had feelings. I said yes. She said she thought so too. Ate all her dinner. He read it twice and put it in the drawer with the others. Nora was asleep when he came in. She slept with one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress, which was something she had done since infancy, as though reaching for something even in sleep. He tucked her arm back under the blanket. She stirred slightly, made a sound, and resettled. Her fossil books were stacked on the nightstand. She had put a sticky note on the top one that said, "Important." He made himself a cup of tea he didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table. The apartment on Clement Street was not large. In the early months after Nora's mother left, it had felt insufficient, too small to contain the logistics of one parent managing what was designed for 2. Now it felt correctly sized. He had stopped measuring it against what it wasn't. His name was in the agency's system as Ethan Callaway, driver. Before that, it had been on a lease agreement, 2 patent filings, and a business registration for a firm called Callaway Structural Consulting, which he had operated for 4 years before the circumstances of his life made the hours impossible to sustain. He had worked with building engineers and project managers and, occasionally, with the legal and financial teams who reviewed structural compliance on large commercial developments. He had sat in rooms where people argued about what a signature was worth and what an access clause permitted. He still read the financial news on Tuesday mornings when Nora was at school. He still knew what a board proxy fight looked like from the outside and what it looked like from inside the documents. He still knew how access credential logs worked and what they could prove and, more usefully, what they couldn't. He was, in fact, not complicated. He just had a longer history than the agency profile reflected. And he had learned that most of what he needed he already had. And the rest was a matter of paying attention. He poured out the cold tea and went to bed. She called the agency at 8 in the morning and requested the same driver. He was at the Brownstone by 8:20. She came out in a charcoal suit, her hair arranged, her face unreadable. She looked like a woman who had slept well, which he was reasonably certain she had not. "My CFO found something this morning," she said when she got in. "Drent has a letter of intent. A signed one. From Kessler. When was it signed? 2 weeks ago." She was looking out the window. "Which means this has been active longer than I thought. And Kessler sat across from me at dinner last night and discussed Q3 projections. Who else knows about the letter? Margot, my CFO, and now me. And Drent, obviously." A pause. "And Ferris, his attorney. The letter is signed, but it's not binding until the board votes," Ethan said. "If Drent doesn't have a majority, the letter is just paper." She looked at him in the mirror. "You know something about this," she said. It was not a question. "I know something about most things," he said. "Where do you need to be first?" She gave him the address of the Hartwell Group building. Then, "My father's credentials are still active in our system. Margot confirmed it this morning. If we can establish that data was accessed from those credentials and transmitted externally, we have a compliance violation on Drent's end. He used improperly obtained information. You need the access logs. I have the access logs. What I need is someone who can tell me what I'm looking at. Our IT director is thorough but slow. And I need this done before noon because Drent has called an emergency shareholders discussion for 2 o'clock. That's not a board meeting. No. But it's the setup for one. He's building narrative. She pressed her fingers against the window glass briefly, then dropped her hand. If I walk in there without evidence, he controls the room. Ethan pulled into the Hartwell Group's underground parking and stopped the car. He said, I can look at the logs. She turned to look at him directly, not in the mirror, directly. You can read access logs. I can read access logs. She considered him for a long moment. He met her eyes without elaboration. All right, she said. The logs were 3 months of records, time-stamped and user-attributed, running to nearly 400 pages of entries. Margot small, precise, wearing the expression of someone who had been awake since 5 in the morning and was running on professional obligation, set him up at a conference table with a laptop and a secondary monitor and did not ask who he was. Vivienne said, He's consulting. Margot accepted this, the way she accepted most things. Vivienne said, as fact that required no supplementary explanation. She brought Ethan a coffee without asking and pulled up the log archive and left. He worked through the logs methodically. He had done forensic reviews before, not of credential access, specifically, but of systems under stress, which operated on the same principle. Look for what shouldn't be there and trace it backward. In structural work, you look for load concentrations the blueprint didn't intend. In access logs, you look for activity that falls outside the user's established pattern. Wrong times, wrong directories, a duration inconsistent with ordinary business. He worked outward from the most constrained users first. The finance analyst's access was narrow and task-specific. Her timestamps clustering around business hours with no exceptions. Margot's log was dense and senior, and entirely consistent with a CFO managing a company through a pending acquisition. The IT director's records were thorough in the way of someone who used the system to document their own movements, which left a legible trail. That left the board members, and Gerald Hartwell. At 11:15 he found it, 3 weeks ago, a Tuesday morning at 9:42. Credentials belonging to Gerald Hartwell had been used to access the company's financial modeling drive. The access had lasted 47 minutes. The directory he had opened contained 3-year revenue projections, divisional breakdowns, and the working documents for the Caldwell acquisition. It was, in precise terms, exactly what someone would need in order to approach a board member with a credible offer. The access had originated from a residential IP address in Lakeview. Gerald Hartwell's registered home address was 2 blocks north of Vivienne's brownstone. He called Vivienne into the conference room. She stood over the laptop and read what he had marked. She read it twice, with the careful attention of someone determining whether the thing in front of them means what it appears to mean. Her face did not change, but something behind it did a small internal adjustment, the kind that doesn't reverse. He didn't just talk to Drent, she said. He went in and pulled it himself. Yes, from his home, a pause, at 9:40 in the morning, which means he planned it. He wasn't acting impulsively, he understood. Her voice was flat and precise. He's not capable of navigating our financial modeling interface without knowing what he's doing. He spent 15 years on this board. He built the architecture of that system with our first IT director. She straightened. He genuinely believes he was within his rights. He thinks I've mismanaged his legacy, that Drent would do better. She paused. He's wrong, but he didn't do this out of malice. He did it out of a very particular kind of confidence. He let that sit. There was nothing useful to add to it. The timeline is clean, Ethan said. Drent's letter of intent was signed 14 days after this access. The information he used to secure Kessler's signature came from an unauthorized pull on your internal systems. Unauthorized because the credentials should have been revoked after my father left the board. Unauthorized because Gerald Hartwell is not a current board member and used access that wasn't properly closed. That's a procedural gap on the company's side, but the access itself was taken without disclosure. Drent built his move on that information. Your attorney needs to see this before 2 o'clock. She looked at the screen one more time, then at him. Who are you? She asked. Not the same question as before. She knew more of the answer now. She was asking for the rest. Structural engineer. 6 years. Patent filings. 4 years of my own consultancy before the timeline stopped working. He said it plainly, the way he said most things. My daughter needs someone who's there. Everything else arranges around that. She held his eyes. You gave up a career. I rearranged one. The distinction landed. She let it. You could do this, she said. What you did today. Formally. Contracted. I know, he said. I do it when it's needed. It's needed now. Then I'm here now. Her phone buzzed. Margot, from the outer office. The corporate attorney had arrived and was asking which room. She stood. Stay, she said. Please, the words sat in the air between them, and he did not comment on it. He nodded. She went to meet her attorney. The 2 o'clock meeting lasted 90 minutes. Ethan waited in the lobby with a cup of coffee and a copy of the building's architectural digest that someone had left on a chair. He read the piece on load-bearing innovations in mid-century renovation and found it more interesting than the author probably intended. He knew, broadly, how the meeting would go. The attorney had the access logs. The timeline was clean. Drent would have options: withdraw gracefully, press forward, and absorb the compliance liability, or negotiate, but his position had changed from aggressive to defensive, and that was the only change that mattered today. Vivienne came out of the conference suite at 3:52. She did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had done something difficult and was still holding the weight of it. Drent withdrew the letter, she said. For now. He'll regroup. Probably. My father called during the meeting. I didn't answer. She sat down across from Ethan. She sat the way she never had before, not braced, just sitting. I'll need to speak to him. I don't know what I'll say. You don't have to know that today. She looked at him. You're very certain about what I don't have to do today. I'm certain about very little, he said. But some things can wait. A silence. From outside the lobby windows, the city was doing its 3:55 thing, people leaving buildings, heading toward trains and parking garages, and the particular machinery of getting somewhere else. I have a daughter, he said. Not as a disclosure, just as a fact he was placing on the table between them. She's 7. She's currently at school, thinking about whether dinosaurs were lonely. Vivienne blinked. Whether they were what? It's a question she's been working on. What's her conclusion? She hasn't reached one. She's thorough. He looked at his coffee. She has a loose tooth. She's very annoyed about it. She says it disrupts her eating. And she resents the disruption. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. Then something moved across her face that he hadn't seen there before. Not warmth exactly, but the precursor to it. The recognition of something real. She sounds like someone I'd respect, she said. She'd respect you back, he said. She respects competent people. Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away. And there was the very beginning of something on her face that was not quite a smile, but was related to one. She said, I haven't eaten today. I know. How do you know? I pay attention. It's my job. She almost smiled at that. So you keep saying. He stood. There's a diner, 2 blocks east. They have soup. She looked at him, as though the suggestion were written in a language she was still learning to read. A CEO, with 3 division heads in the building, going to a diner 2 blocks east for soup. She picked up her jacket from the chair. All right. The diner was called Hartley's, and it had been there since before either of them was born, which you could tell from the way the booths had settled into themselves, the vinyl slightly worn at the seat edges, and the table surface, a laminate that had been cleaned so many thousands of times, it had achieved a particular kind of depth, like something that had been through enough to become simple. She ordered the chicken soup, and he ordered coffee, and she looked at him. You're not eating. I'm waiting on a call from Nora's school. Tuesday is library day. She argues with the librarian about classification systems. Vivienne blinked. She argues, constructively. She has opinions about the Dewey Decimal System that the librarian finds challenging. What are the opinions? That science books should be organized by subject, not by the author's last name. Because in her words, you don't look for a book about volcanoes by thinking about who wrote it. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. Then, she's right. The librarian disagrees. The librarian is wrong. He almost smiled. She caught it, the almost of it. She sounds like someone I'd respect, she said. She'd respect you back, he said. She respects competent people. The soup arrived. She ate it, which she had not been doing eating properly. With attention. He noticed she did everything with attention when she was not performing something. At the hotel, she had been performing control. At the Brownstone, she had been too exhausted to perform anything. Here, in a booth at Hartley's on a Tuesday afternoon, she was just eating soup, and it was the most human he had seen her. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Margot. She looked at Ethan. Do I need to answer this? Does she know you're not in the building? She knows I'm taking an hour. Then she can wait an hour. Vivienne put the phone face down on the table. She looked at it for a moment. This decision she had made. And then she returned to the soup. It was not a large thing, but it was new. Nora had decided, by Thursday, that the dinosaurs had probably been lonely in the same way she was sometimes lonely at school, not the bad kind. Just the kind where you had things inside you that weren't easy to explain to other people. She told Ethan this at dinner. He said, "That's a real thing. A lot of smart creatures feel that way." She considered this. "Do you? Sometimes. Do you now?" He thought about it honestly. "Less than I did last week." She seemed satisfied with this and returned to her pasta. Vivienne had texted him twice since Tuesday. Both texts were practical. Once to confirm an access log detail for the attorney's documentation, once to let him know that the IT director had formally revoked Gerald Hartwell's credentials and the compliance filing was complete. He had responded to both. On Friday, she texted, "Nora's question. I've been thinking about it." He wrote back, "What did you conclude? I think the question is whether lonely is the right word." Maybe they weren't lonely. Maybe they just hadn't found the specific other creature that could understand what they were saying. He thought about this. Then, "I'll tell her that. She'll want to refine it. She can tell me what she concludes." He looked at that sentence for a moment. Then he put the phone down and finished the dishes. She called him on Saturday morning, not through the agency. "I'm at the farmer's market on Linden," she said. "I don't entirely know why." "Because it's Saturday," he said. "I haven't been to a farmer's market in 3 years. Were you good at it before?" A pause. "I bought things I didn't cook. That's standard." She almost laughed. He could hear the shape of it. "Nora, is she would? She want to come? If you're not busy." I saw a stand with fossils. Actual fossils. Nora heard the word fossils from across the apartment and sat up from the couch with the velocity of a creature who had been waiting for this information her whole life. The market on Linden ran from 8 to 1 along 3 blocks of closed street. The fossil stand was run by a retired geology professor named Dr. Aldred who had opinions about the Cretaceous period and was very willing to share them with a 7-year-old who had questions. Nora had many questions. She held a piece of compressed sediment the professor had placed in her hands and asked how it knew to be a rock. The professor told her about pressure and time. She said that was how lots of things worked, which the professor agreed with. She asked whether the thing inside the sediment, the shape of something, pressed and ancient, had known it was going to become important later. The professor said he didn't think it had known. Nora said that was sad but also maybe okay, because important things probably don't need to know they're important while they're happening. The professor looked at Ethan. Ethan shrugged slightly. Vivienne stood beside him and watched. She was not performing anything. She was just watching a 7-year-old have a conversation with a retired professor about geological time and the nature of significance. And something in her face had gone very still in the way that things go still when they are paying full attention. "She's right," Vivienne said quietly. "She usually is," Ethan said. "It must be difficult. It keeps me honest." She looked at him sideways. "You do more than follow up on her questions." He didn't answer that. They walked the market afterward, not with intention, just with direction. Nora found the honey stand, the bread stand, a woman selling small hand-thrown pots, and a dog whose owner permitted extensive interaction. The dog was large and patient, and Nora asked it several questions it declined to answer. She accepted this without visible disappointment, which the professor would have recognized as a mature philosophical position. Vivienne bought the honey and the bread and a small pot without deciding to. She discovered she had done this only at the end of the block, when she looked at what she was carrying. "I bought things again," she said. "That's what markets are for. I usually resist it. How's that working for you?" She looked at the small pot. It was the color of river clay. Unassuming. The kind of thing made to hold something. "I'll figure out what to put in it." At the end of the last block, Nora took Vivian's free hand because her own hands were full, the sediment fossil the professor had let her keep, a piece of beeswax from the honey stand, her father's hand on the other side. She took Vivian's hand the way she took things she needed. Directly. Without negotiation. Vivian looked down. She did not say anything. She held Nora's hand, and they walked back to the car. He drove her home that afternoon. She sat in the front. This time she had not asked if this was all right. She had simply gotten in the front, and he had not commented. Nora was in the back with her fossil and her beeswax, and had fallen asleep somewhere on Meridian Boulevard, her head listing to the left with the particular boneless surrender of a child who has used up everything she had. At the brownstone, he parked, and they sat for a moment in the quiet of someone asleep in the back seat. "Take me home," she said. He looked at her. "Not as an order," she said. The words came carefully. She was someone who chose words carefully. And this was one of those times when the care showed. "I mean, I'm asking. I know you have to get her home, but tomorrow, or whenever, I'm just asking if this is something that—" She stopped. Tried again. "I haven't asked for much. From people. It tends to go badly. I know. You can't know. You've known me 4 days. I know enough." He held her gaze. "And it doesn't have to be decided today." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Nora in the back, asleep with the fossil in both hands, holding it even in sleep. She decided. Vivian said quietly. "Nora decides things fast," he said. "She always has. I just try to keep up." Vivian looked at the brownstone. At the lamp in the window, she had started leaving it on in the evenings. It looked more like a home with a lamp on. "I don't need threatening this time," she said. "No," he agreed. "You don't." She got out of the car. On the top step, she turned. "Nora's question," she said. "The dinosaurs. Tell her my answer was incomplete. Tell her I think the lucky ones found their specific, other creature, and after that they probably weren't lonely at all." He watched her go inside. The lamp was on in the window. In the back seat, Nora held her fossil and slept. Outside, the city ran its ordinary Saturday evening, indifferent and relentless, lit by amber and white, and the particular light of things that stay on for someone. He drove home through it. He did not feel, this evening, like any part of it was temporary. The Hartwell Group's Q1 results, published the following March, were the strongest in the company's history. The CFO's letter to shareholders noted, in appropriately formal language, that internal governance procedures had been reviewed and substantially strengthened. A new compliance framework had been implemented. Board access protocols had been updated. The company had never been in better structural shape. Vivian Hartwell gave a brief prepared statement to the business press and declined follow-up questions. She had somewhere to be. Wallace Drent had withdrawn cleanly in the end, not because he was required to, but because the math had stopped working. He was a practical man. He moved on. Raymond Kessler sent Vivian a handwritten note the week after the shareholders' meeting. He said he had been approached and had made a decision he regretted. She wrote back 2 sentences. She was not interested in prolonged reckoning. She was interested in what came next. Gerald Hartwell called her on a Sunday morning in February. She answered. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. They talked carefully, in the manner of 2 people assessing whether a relationship is worth the work of repair. By the end, they had not decided, but they had left the question open, which was more than they'd managed in years. She considered that progress. Nora Calloway, age 7, had reached her final position on the dinosaur question. The lonely ones were the ones who stopped looking. The not lonely ones were the ones who found their creature and had the sense to hold on. She had written this in a notebook she kept, for important conclusions. The cover was green, with a small painted swan she had done herself. She showed it to Vivian on a Saturday morning in March, sitting at the kitchen table on Clement Street, while Ethan made coffee, and the lamp on the counter, the one with the swan on the base, cast its light across all three of them. Vivienne read it carefully. She said, "This is very good." Nora said, "I know." Vivienne said, "Do you think they were happy? The ones who found their creature?" Nora thought about this for a long moment. Then, "I think happy is a word people use when they run out of more specific words." Vivienne looked at Ethan. He handed her a cup of coffee. She took it. Specific, she thought. This lamp, this table, this child with her careful conclusions and her green notebook. The river clay pot on the windowsill with the small herb growing in it. The brownstone with its lamp on in the evenings. She had stopped measuring things against what they weren't. "You're right," she told Nora. "Happy is a starting point." Nora wrote this at the bottom of the page in her careful print and closed the notebook. Ethan sat down at the table. The morning continued around them warm, unguarded. The ordinary kind of beginning that turns out to be the only kind that lasts.